So, who has been in a presentation with me other than this? No, who's been in the presentation? Were they all this morning? Okay, so anyway, I'm feeling much better now. Thank you. So, for those who don't know who I am, I'm Julie Love. I run the Massachusetts School Nurse Liaison Project. It was for 5 years the McLean School Nurse Liaison Project. I offer education like this presentation, previous presentations, all kinds of presentations based on topics people have requested. And I'm open for consultation that anyone in the schools can call me if they've got any kind of issue that they'd like to have someone to kibitz on. It's confidential. You don't tell me anything about the kid other than age and gender. Of course, you would first go to the nurse or the counselor or so on, but they might call me or they might tell you to go ahead and call me so we don't play telephone with all the information. And it's just kind of a brief little extra brain to look at whatever you've got to work on. And then I also offer resources, which if you notice the slides that were going before that I took away before you were noticing, and now you're wishing you were watching them, sorry. But they do exist in that big binder right there. So if people can start passing that around, if you're not interested in looking at it, or looking at it if you are, what that has is in the very front, there's a paper where you could write things down on if you wanted to. But the first few pages are little thumbnails of all those slides. And each one has a letter and number code on it. Anything that you would like me to send you, you write down that letter number code. Then you can either write it on that sheet in the front or write it on any random piece of paper that you give me if you like. Give me your email address though, that helps. Or there's a QR code and it'll be at the end as well that you could go to SurveyMonkey to enter it in there. And then I send you stuff. Yay. The small ones at the front, anything that you really can't see, there's full-size versions to it. That's why the binder is so big, but you could just look at the first few pages and then pass it on if you wanted to. So those are the things I offer. Yay. I offer them on time. And I offer them audible to the people who are doing the webinar that they couldn't hear the last one because I forgot to hit a button. Anyway, my program was just for the Southeast and now it's for the whole state, and someday soon it will have more than just me in it, like maybe someone could sit over there and notice when there are things going on. So, but this afternoon's topic is understanding the effects of trauma. I have to do a disclosure because I'm getting contact hours. I have no conflicts of interest or commercial bias to disclose. So on the evaluation, it will ask, did I tell you? Did I tell you that my program has none? And then it asks if there is any bias present. They mean commercial bias. So if you see anything that I could be getting kickbacks on, let me know because I'd love to hire an assistant. So what is this thing called trauma that you talked about? Okay, trauma is any experience that overwhelms your ability to cope. So yeah, there can be things that are traumatic, but if you manage to cope with them fine, then they're just really bad, not necessarily causing a trauma response. But it tends to be something that really threatens either your life, your physical safety, or just kind of your place in the world. You know, just the knowledge that bad things could happen to you can be traumatic even without them directly happening to you. You know, a kid their parents' divorce can be traumatic because the kid doesn't really know where they fit in the world anymore, things like that. It is an extremely individual thing. So two people can have the same exact experience, and one of them has a traumatic response and the other person copes, integrates, and moves on. At which point, we being humans who tend towards being jerks tend to get kind of, oh, this person's brave and that person's weak, or this person's strong. No, that's not the way it works. Okay, so during COVID, we've seen this a lot of people deciding that all the experiences need to be lined up, and your experience must be this tall to count as being something that you are allowed to have strong reactions to. And no, that's not the way it works. So all through COVID, lots of people have had lots of traumatic experiences. And whether you have or not, whether you've responded in a certain way or not, says nothing about like your quality as a person. And you especially want to step away from this idea of, I shouldn't be as bothered as I am by things because worse things have happened to other people, because that didn't help anyone. I mean, during early in COVID, if you remember, you'd have like the 9-year-old who's miserable because his birthday party's canceled, and the high schooler who's like, oh my God, what happens with college now? Meanwhile, the parents aren't sure if they might lose the house, and grandma thinks she might die. I think we can all agree that it is not appropriate to turn to the 9-year-old and say, get over it, it's just a party, come on, we're suffering here. You know, you wouldn't do that. So recognizing that everybody has what they have, and how they respond to it depends not just on what they have, but all the rest of the stuff that they have. Okay, I love this diagram because first of all, it makes you remember like your 7th grade physics classes. But you've got basically, you've got the scale. And on this side, you've got all the bad things that happen to you, that have happened to you, all the uncertainty, all the lack of support. Over here, you've got good things that are hopeful to you. And if you plop another bad thing on this side, whether or not it drops and you are traumatized, kind of depends on how much is already there, how much you got over there. And this is the U, that's where the fulcrum, see, I told you it was physics, because where the fulcrum is also affects how tippy this is. And the fulcrum are, again, not about who's strong or weak, but it can be your genetics, it can be your epigenetics, which we won't talk about because that's a separate whole issue, but like your life story and other things like that. So recognizing that everybody has what they have, and not telling people either you must be traumatized or you're not allowed to be traumatized based on what we see on the outside. They go twice because I clicked it twice. So our bodies are hardwired to deal with threats. Okay, so you may have a situation that's a threat, whether or not it's a trauma depends on your ability to cope. So the physiological things are all these wonderful things, all the stress hormones that come rushing out. You're breathing in shallow fast, your muscles tighten up, your sphincters either close or open. Your stomach shuts down because it would really rather not be working while you're doing the running away from the bear thing. All of it, and very importantly, especially for the educational system, the brain shifts from the cognitive rational down to the lizard brain survival mode, which is a good thing. This is what you want your brain to do. If you are suddenly being chased by a bear, the last thing you want is for your brain to automatically be like, well, let's see, that's about 10 miles an hour, and I can run about 8 miles an hour, and that tree is 30 feet away, but the bottom branch is, you know, you do not want to be doing geometry. You just want to get out of there. So that's the natural process. Problem is, this might be going on while you're trying to actually teach the kid geometry. So what it is preparing your body for is whatever you will do in response to a threat. Sometimes people wander through a couple of different ones of these. Some kids and adults will focus in, and that is their go-to response to a threat. Now, who grew up when there was just fight or flight, and those were our only choices, right? Turns out there were more choices. We just didn't name them yet. Okay, so we got the fight it or the run away. Then people notice, yeah, but what about that deer caught in headlights thing? Okay, then there's the freeze. But there's also some others that we tend to not talk about, like posture. Posture is that pop up, pop up. If I look big and intimidating, you'll leave me alone. Of course, if it still comes at me, I got nothing and I'm out of there. You know, I'd have to default to another one or else get eaten by the bear. And one that we totally don't notice is submit. Submit is, if I get on the same side as the threat, then it won't hurt me, it'll hurt someone else. So when we see a bully out there with their posse, we tend to think of the posse as like future wannabe bullies, and we don't think that, no, they might be having just as much of a threat response or traumatic response to the existence of the bully as everyone else. They're just processing it through a well, if I'm on their side. And that's the one you see more and more and more when people get older, like in the adult world. I mean, how many times have you seen where the boss tells a joke at the expense of someone and all the underlings laugh? Because if you don't laugh at the boss's joke, then the boss might be telling a joke at your expense the next time. So yeah, we're all going to line up with the bully against the person who's being teased. So normally, I'm going to take a risk and see what it is. And normally, threat passes, and your body can go back to baseline. Okay, it takes 20 or 30 minutes, you know, all your heart rate goes down, all that. It's kind of hard because if the threat never really passes, it just keeps going and going and going. It gets complicated. But if the threat has passed, your body goes back to baseline and your brain processes and files what it learned. The memories are consolidated. Now, the memories are not typical memories. They are different quality of memories than the ones you form when you aren't soaked in stress hormones, okay? They'll be sort of spotty, like crystal clear with gaps, like Swiss cheese. Who here has ever subjected yourself to the extreme trauma of getting married? Anyone? I mean, if you think back on that wedding day, it's kind of weird because you will have like a videotape memory of this conversation with your aunt. And you don't have any idea what you were doing in the bathroom or how you got there or why you were talking about this, but you know, and so you have these gaps with crystal clear in between them. And that's the way memories form when you're in the midst of feeling threatened, okay? Well, what the brain is trying to do is figure out, okay, what worked, what didn't work. So now we know next time a bear comes at me, I will feel more safe because I know what to do. I got through it once and I'll get through it even better next time because I've learned from the experience. And the world now makes sense and I feel more safe. A trauma reaction, I guess it really just likes to have this. Not that really annoying thing about it. Yeah, I have no idea why it objects to that. But anyway, okay. In a trauma response, you don't feel safe afterwards. You feel more at risk afterwards. The world does not make sense. You feel like, holy shit, I never knew that there were bears that were going to try and eat me, and now I have to be afraid of them all the time. Okay? Your body and your mind are like, we were supposed to keep you safe and a bad thing happened. Where did the system break down? It's like if you've got an alarm system for your house and someone breaks in anyway, you're going to want to go adjust that system. You might make the alarm go off louder, or you might make it go off sooner. You know, don't wait for the window to break the moment you hear a tap. So the same sort of thing happens where you might have someone who has a stronger response when they're threatened. Used to be that they just argue and now they're going to hit. Or they might have a response to a lower level of threat. You know, I'm going to respond like that, not just if someone threatens me, but if someone insults me. I'm going to have that response, not just if something is coming at me, but if something startles me at all, I will have that level of response. The brain also, because it was doing this in the midst of a trauma and wasn't being logical, might attach things to the wrong thing. So it might say, okay, we're going to respond to things that are associated with a threat. So now I can't really stand to be around anyone who reminds me of that person who hurt me, or I can't go in that building where the bad thing happened. Or it might be completely nonsensical. Like you're in a car accident and now you're better and you're driving down the road and suddenly your heart's coming out of your chest. You feel like you're about to die. All you did was drive over a bridge. What you don't even consciously realize is that half a mile before your car accident, you drove over a bridge. And some part of your brain is saying, oh, get ready, car accident coming. You know, there's no logic to it because it was formed when logic was really not online. And you might not even remember that. You know, you're walking down the street and suddenly you feel like you're going to die. Someone walked by wearing a baseball cap. You don't even realize that the baseball cap somehow got linked to what happened to you in the past. You can also have the brain is constantly practicing, drilling, so that you will be ready to do. And as you know, when you have a fire drill, you don't tell everyone there's going to be a fire drill. It just comes out of the blue. And same thing happens where your brain will be like, oh, you're having a nice day, but right now you need to remember that trauma and think about what to do. And so you get intrusive memories. That's another difference, is that you don't get to choose when you're going to be thinking about them. They're just going to pop up whenever they feel like it. And remembering might not be enough. We're going to have full-on practices. And so these are the symptoms that are associated with the trauma. And when they persist, that's what becomes diagnostic for PTSD. So you've got where the person like jumps out of their skin, increased startle reflex, or constantly, you know, scanning the environment, hypervigilance, intrusive memories, or if they're asleep and they have intrusive memories, we call them nightmares. Flashbacks is a word that gets beaten up a lot. Flashback means not just bad memory, it means reliving what happened before. Like I smell it, I feel it, I am having a full sense around experience. Or same as the memories might be little chips and fragments, I might just get a little chip of it. Where all of a sudden I'm smelling cigar smoke and I don't know why. Or all of a sudden I'm feeling really anxious. I don't know why. I'm just getting the emotional part of it. And I don't even know what caused this. If you're having the full-on one, it can be so omnipresent that you do not have any awareness of your current environment. And that's what we call dissociation, where the person is totally gone. They are not there. And I've had, you know, on the units, I've had times when this girl is beating up all the staff around her, and we know she's not hitting any of us. She's trying to hit the people that attacked her, because that's where she is, and we just need to somehow figure out how to help her get past that. Now, sometimes these come out of the blue. Sometimes they are caused by a sensory stimulus, a trigger. And so it's a very unpleasant experience. And one of the things you will do is anything on the planet you can to avoid having it happen again. So you start doing anything to avoid triggers. That's why it's like, yeah, I might be able to go in that building and not feel like I'm going to die. But why don't I just not go in that building ever again? I'm going to avoid those triggers. And it's hard to connect with other people. There's this social thing around, and it's hard because people will try to be supportive and say, but you're safe now. You don't have to be scared anymore. That was over in the war. That was, you know, that was with your old family. Now you're with a safe family. And the problem is they felt safe before and they were wrong. And their brain knows that, yeah, they're not going to get fooled again. They live in a different universe now. They live in a universe where these bad things happen to you, not to other people. And with any luck, you don't live in that universe. And they would not want you to come join them in that universe, but you cannot get them back in your universe. And so there can be this very big disconnect where you need to build bridges rather than trying to drag people into each other's world saying, no, no, you're safe. Just feel safe now. So when a person is very impaired by the triggers or the avoidance of the triggers, that's when we start to look at as a diagnosable illness, okay? Now, there's something we call acute stress disorder. This is sort of temporary PTSD because it might get better. If it sits around for 6 months, then we go ahead and call it PTSD. CPTSD is complex PTSD. This is when it has been so constant that it's become normal life, like childhood, or when it's happening at very key developmental stages. So you'll have kids where they had a traumatic time early in childhood, and now it's going to have ripple effects potentially throughout their lives. And that can be a very different thing. They've got kind of two flavors of PTSD. When it becomes so normal, they actually downregulate their stress hormones. You know, the adrenal glands are like, yeah, but you're always threatened. Get back to me when you really need me. And that's where you get a person who's just, life is boring. You know, there was one person who came back from Vietnam saying the hardest thing was realizing at 19 that nothing in his life would ever be exciting. Because your body's like, yeah, unless something is really there threatening you, it's not worth getting revved up for. And this is what contributes to people like growing up in a violent situation and going and dating violent situations. You know, if you've ever talked to someone who's got a trauma history and then they just keep dating abusers, you're like, well, why don't you go with this nice guy I introduced you to? Oh, you're too nice, it's boring. But there's no passion there because your brain does not really make a distinction between loving passion and pure death passion. It's just not going to wake up and give you much excitement. Unless that can fade over time, but you have to get really used to being bored for a long time before that re-regulates. But we do want to recognize just because a person has had a trauma history does not mean that they have PTSD. That's one of the things that really annoys me is that people are like, well, because this happened, everyone's going to have PTSD. Like, no, you might not. Not everybody gets the symptoms. And not everyone gets the symptoms keeps them. Yes, people will have symptoms immediately after, but then your body can adjust. I mean, A year from now, when hopefully the pandemic's behind us, go into a crowded room and sneeze and watch how many people jump out of their skin. But that's not going to be a permanent thing. People will eventually start settling back down, because when you remove the barriers to healing, the nature of the brain is to heal. Anyone ever watch West Wing? Great TV show. In first season, there's a shooting, and then halfway through the second season, there's this great episode where one of the people is having symptoms of PTSD, but he doesn't know it. It's called Noel, and so it's all told in flashbacks as he's talking to a psychologist. And what it comes down to is that all the Christmas music his brain was processing as sirens, and that was harkening back to when he had been shot and no one knew he'd been shot, and he can hear the sirens, but he thinks he's going to just be left there and die. And so when that finally all comes together, you know, he turns to the psychologist and is like, "You've only talked to me for an hour. How can you know what I have?" I knew the moment I came in the room. You have PTSD. The first thing he says is, "That doesn't sound like something you're allowed to have when you work for the president." Which just cuts straight to the stigma attached to having any issues. That's the other reason why people will be like, "No, you must be strong, because after all, if you have a trauma reaction, then you are broken for all time and no one will ever trust you with anything." But then the other thing that was great is that Josh is like, well, what do I do now? And he's like, "Oh, well, here's a therapist. You can see someone and it's going to get better." He's like, "How do you know that?" He said, "Because that's what we do. The brain is inclined to heal if you let it. And the things that keep us from healing are deciding that you're always going to be broken, being told all your life, well, you've had trauma, so you're always going to have PTSD. Or deciding that there's nothing wrong with me, there's nothing wrong with me, I'm not going to grieve, I'm not going to deal with this." But if you go ahead and move through the process, there's every chance that you could heal. For a person to be diagnosed, they have to have distress or dysfunction. So they have to have their lives being directly impacted for it to be a diagnosable thing, not just the presence of having had a trauma. Now, I've said the word trigger a lot, and trigger is the word that gets beat up the most in our language these days. So let's be clear about what we mean when we talk about triggers. Okay, the official definition of trigger from a psychological standpoint is a stimulus, any sort of stimulus. It might be something outside or it might be a thought crossing my head, which causes a flashback. Okay, so that happens, and now I am reliving some portion or all of the trauma. Okay, now, as I said, it gets misused a lot. So an acceptable overuse of it is a stimulus that causes a memory of a trauma. Doesn't have to be the whole sensory thing, doesn't have to be the reliving of it, but just remembering it is going to be the very least distracting. You know, it's going to take you back into an emotional state that you weren't in. You know, if you are healing from a loss, you know, your grandma died, and you're now getting to where you're ready to be out and about some, and so a friend takes you to, you know, a comedy club. Remember when we used to get to go to places, would laugh out loud and not worry about what's great. Anyway, so you're there, and the comedian starts telling jokes about his grandma. Now you're crying. It's not a flashback, but it's gonna be kind of distracting. And with any luck, people will be nice to you about it. But there's an unacceptable overuse that starts leading towards people getting very harsh around the concept of triggers. The overuse that we see a lot of is anything that I don't want to deal with, and if I call it a trigger, you got to stop. It's the magic veto button on any conversation, any issue, anything that I don't feel like having you talk about. I get to say, I'm triggered and you have to stop. You give anyone that power, of course they're going to use it, okay? Kids use it all the time. And by kids, I mean people well into their 70s and 80s, okay? So it's not surprising that people will misuse words, but we are in the habit of not letting them then own those words and redefine them for us. You know, if a kid comes and says, it's homework, it's so retarded, one would hope that you wouldn't go, oh, sorry, we can't use that word anymore. He owns it now, and he says that that's what this means. No, you turn to them and say, that word you just used has a specific meaning, and the way you're using it now is kind of hurtful to people for whom that meaning is a real thing. So let's come up with some other words to describe the homework. Same thing. If you are bothered by something, let's teach you a word to describe that, rather than saying, oh yeah, if you use the word triggered, you can say, hey, I know that you're used to hearing that word, but that word has a very specific meaning. And throwing it around casually like that is kind of hurtful to the people for whom it's a real thing. Because when you throw it around casually, people throw it back and get nasty about it. And this is where you get people who will be like, oh, these snowflakes, you can't talk about anything because they might get triggered. Oh, we got to put trigger warnings on things, and making fun of the idea of trigger warnings. This is a trigger warning here. And what it says is the event conducted just beyond the sign may contain triggering and or sensitive material. Sexual violence, sexual assault, and abuse are some of the topics mentioned within this event. If you feel triggered, please know that there are resources to support you. I don't really see anything wrong with telling people that, rather than just kind of surprising them with it in the middle of an event. Okay, there are content warnings on all kinds of things now, and they're being increasingly used, sometimes to the point of being kind of a little bit ridiculous, but people ideally mean well. But they end up drawing lots of vicious pushback of people like, oh, why are you upset? You should not be upset about this. Oh, are you being triggered now? And things like that. Which, when you stop and think about it, if someone's been abused, one of the first things the abuser does is say, you're being awfully thin-skinned, I barely touched you. So it'd be really nice if we could stop reliving that exact pattern of behavior on anyone who says, you know, when that is discussed, I have a reaction to it that is painful. But there tends to be a lot of arguing and debate around it, you know, so people will be like, oh, trigger warnings, they censor information, you can't say anything anymore. No, they do not censor, they just let people know what is going to be said. I mean, if you're not going to be talking about rape, then you would not need to put a content warning saying that you're going to, right? It's kind of like putting an allergen label on food. It's not actually stopping it, it's just letting people know what they're getting into. We have it on movies all the time. You got no problem with saying, okay, this movie is rated this because it's got violence and strong language. Or it's got, you know, it's letting people make an informed decision about what they want to do. People are like, oh, well, all they're doing is it's encouraging people to avoid them. Their informed decision is letting them just avoid. Like, no, it's letting them decide when they're going to do this work, rather than having it just be sprung upon them without any knowledge that was going to happen. My oldest daughter came to us when she was 15, and she'd been, you know, a variety of bad experiences. And one day she was, thank God, doing the homework in advance. So she was reading what they were reading for English. I don't remember what the book was, but she comes down in tears because at some point the main character gets kidnapped. And this was really making her unable to stop thinking about the time when she was 8 and her bio dad had kidnapped her for a week. She didn't know if she'd ever see her mom again. Like, what do I do? I'm like, don't worry, we got you. You're fine. And we called the school. We did not yell at the school for assigning this book. Of course, they have no idea. We just said, hey, just FYI, she has a reaction to this. So when you know you're going to discuss that chapter, could you please give her someplace else to be? And if it comes up and she needs to leave, let her and cover for her. You know, be compassionate to someone who's having a reaction. Should she be able to be a person who can hear conversation about kidnapping without having a strong emotional reaction? Yes, of course she should. But the work to achieve that goal should not need to be done in 9th grade in front of all of her classmates. That's all a trigger warning will be, is letting a person make that choice of when and where they're going to be working on it. People say, oh, but the real world's a really scary place, you know, they're going to be encountering this stuff. It's like, yes, we know, they see it all the time. Having a content warning is just kind of saying, hey, I would like to not participate in inflicting more pain on you by letting you actually know about this up front. I think the real thing driving a lot of this is people saying, well, we don't know what needs a content warning. And you're going to get all mad at us if we say something that triggers someone that I'm supposed to feel guilty and terrible when I don't want to feel guilty and terrible, because feeling guilty and terrible feels bad, and because I did not know it would bother them. Yeah, of course you can't know everything like that. We're not saying that we want to yell at you for it. I mean, a person who's in distress might not be terribly polite, but the main thing is that you should be compassionate. You know, if you're out with your friend and the comedian starts talking about grandparents and they start crying, one would hope you wouldn't say, oh, come on, it's been a month. Can't we just enjoy the show? You would probably, nor would you be screaming at the comedian, how dare you talk about grandparents? But you'd say, hey, maybe we should go do something else and have a compassionate response to someone who's having that reaction. At the same time, it's not rocket science to figure out what things it would be a good idea to put a content warning on, because there are certain categories of experiences that are more likely than you would expect to be an experience that someone in the room, if you've got any collection of people, might have had that experience. If they've had that experience, they might have been traumatized by it, and they might potentially have the possibility of a trauma reaction that they would like to schedule rather than having it just sprung upon them. These are what we call adverse childhood experiences. Who's heard about the ACEs? This is a brilliant accidental discovery. Okay, what happened was Kaiser Health, big insurance company out in California, had a program for people getting bariatric surgery. You know, the very expensive. And to be healthy enough for the surgery, first you have to lose a lot of weight. So they had 24 months of intensive case management support for weight loss. And then you get the surgery. But there was some subset of their cohort where they would lose weight for like 23 months, and then it would shoot back up just before surgery. And Kaiser's like, well, we just spent a lot of money for nothing. We got to find out what's going on with that. So they sent some sociologists to go and interview those people to find out what's going on that is causing this. And one of the people interviewing, I don't know what happened in his head. He had a total brain fart where I think it was that he meant to ask this woman at what age she first started dieting, but instead he asked at what age did she first have sex. And before he could pull that back and correct himself, she answered 4. And he had not expected that answer. And he was very startled. And he went back and unpacked it a little more. And then they went back and discovered that all of the women in that cohort were the victims of childhood sexual abuse. Like, oh, there seems to be some sort of correlation between morbid obesity and sabotaging the surgery that would make you lose weight and childhood sexual abuse. We might want to do something about that. Kaiser's like, hell yeah, this is costing us money. What else might be causing things like this? And so they came up with a list. And this was a very crude tool because they wanted to find out across the board. This wasn't just talking to bariatric, this was all of their people, tens of thousands of people. They wanted to find out whether or not they've had any of these traumatic experiences. So it's not a nuanced how much, how long, or anything like that. It's if you have physical abuse before the age of 18, way after 18 doesn't count, before 18 counts, because you need to have nice clear lines when you're interviewing tens of thousands of people. And again, it doesn't matter whether you got hit or whether you got your arm broken. It doesn't matter whether it happened every day or just once. If you had any physical abuse, 1 point. If you also had sexual abuse, 2 points. Emotional abuse, 3 points. So you count all of those, and you get a point for every one that, yes, it happened to you at some point in your childhood. And then once you're 18, no more points because you're now an adult, but your points never change because the past is the past. And this is what they found. I know there's lots of numbers on here to make it complicated. That's breaking them down by the types. But over here, if you look, you say, okay, 12.5%. 1 in 8 people have 4 or more. Up here, oh no, 0, 36%. Wait, 2/3 of the population have at least 1. You know, Washington, when they cranked the numbers, put out this infographic for teachers pointing out that in your given classroom, if you're lucky, you might have 1 row of kids that have 0. It depends on what age you're teaching because you keep accumulating the points until you hit 18. So they were very startled by this. And Kaiser was like, wait, get back to the part where it costs us money. It's an insurance company, what do you want? And they looked at all of these physical things, COPD, arthritis, diabetes, and discovered that the more childhood adverse childhood events you had, the more likely you were to have all of these other diseases. Like, how on earth do you have more diabetes if you've got that? We want to figure this out. And so they made this lovely pyramid. I love this pyramid. It's so silly because they got here, bad things happen, and then there's a cognitive social, and then adoption of the health risk behaviors, and then you get sick, and then you die young. And over here, they've got this little, we have no idea why this goes with. Like, did they ask anyone who actually talks to people? Because stress causes organ damage. Go figure. Yes, you are more likely to get cancer if you're in a chronically stressful situation because your first line of defense against cancer cells is your immune system, which is suppressed if you're under chronic trauma. So, no big surprise. But the thing that really gets me is this adoption of health risk behaviors. As if people are deciding to go and actively do things that are unhealthy. I mean, do these people live in the real world? Do you not realize that you have to put way more effort into being healthy? The lazy approach is the unhealthy approach. I'm in a bar and I've had a little bit too much to drink and I'm going home now. I could try to remember how to call an Uber, or I could just walk. It's only 3 blocks too if I get through that dark alley. The easy way out is usually the unhealthy one. And the reason why you put effort into doing something to keep yourself safe and healthy is because you feel like you live in a world where being safe and healthy is an option. If you live in a world where that's just not happening, you're not going to put any effort into it. Now, my daughter, again, when she was about 16, she came to us and said, I'm going to ask you something, and I think you're going to say I was always told wrong. Love conversations that start like that. She said, when I was young, my mom, my abuela, my aunts, everyone said it's very important that a girl learn how to cook well. Kind of 50s, that's a useful skill. Nothing wrong with that. Said, yeah, because that way your husband beats you less. No. If he's hungry and you can't cook, he can cook his own damn dinner and share it with you. Yeah, you'd say something like that. You guys are so weird. Because that was not the world she grew up in. The world she grew up in, it wasn't if your husband's going to hit you, it's when and how much. If you see the stats of like how many women are raped, you think, I know my friends and I don't tell each other everything, but in my circle of this many women, I don't know if I know anyone. You got to recognize that's because there's some other people holding down the other end of that bell curve where every single one of them has had that experience. And if that's the world you live in, I don't think you're going to spend a lot of time going and getting your blood sugar checked to see if you got diabetes coming because, oh, stop smoking. You might die of cancer if you live that long, So the adoption of health risk behaviors, because people will look and say, see, they are doing these things. They're not showing up for doctor's appointments. They're not taking their meds. It's like, well, why would they if they live in a world where being healthy and safe is just not happening, not part of the world they live in? And part of it is when that's your world, like she was growing up with the, if you get beat, of course it's your fault. You burnt the dinner. Self-blame is something that automatically attaches to being abused. Automatically happens. I mean, part of it is because 95% of the time, she's a perfectly wonderful person. Why should I tarnish her whole reputation for that 5% of the time when she gets drunk and hits me a lot? So there is this kind of sense of, well, they're a good person. Everyone else likes them. Everyone else supports them. Everyone else respects them. They may have been told, well, it's your fault. I'm only doing this to teach you. The number of people are like, well, we have to be able to spank our children because you have to be able to discipline them. Right? And you can't think of another way to do that. There's also this idea of whether or not it's really abuse. Getting back to that, oh, you're being so thin-skinned. I'm not doing anything bad to you. And sometimes it will be really, really creepy. All the nurses have to do a domestic violence training because, of course, we don't know the stuff, right? And one of the stories the woman teaching it told was that there was a woman whose husband takes the kids out to eat, brings them back with the leftovers. It's like, okay, wife sit there, kids go get the leftovers, and kids bring the dog in, feed the leftovers to the dog, and then pick up whatever's left and give it to you. Didn't lay a finger on her, but kind of, does this really count as abuse? Like, be a slippery slope. And by the time you get to that, it's like, well, I accepted all this other stuff, so how can you complain about that? And there's a sense of, you know, if I didn't do that, it wouldn't happen. And this is where we go very tragically wrong, because a person will come and say, well, it's my fault because I burned the dinner. And we tend to say, no, it's not your fault. You didn't do anything. It's not just the fact that she knows she burnt the dinner. She might have burnt the dinner on purpose. Because in this cycle here, we've got the cycle that goes round and round, okay? You've got the light that doesn't work. Okay, so you got where tension is building. That's the walk on eggshells. Anything you do might set it off. And then you do something, it sets it off, and the violence commences. And then there's this honeymoon period frequently. You know, like flowers and, oh, I'm so sorry, I'll never do it again, where they double down on, this is why I'm such a wonderful parent, wonderful partner, wonderful boss, whatever. And then there's a period of normal life, a calm before it starts building again. Might be a few hours, might be a few weeks. You go around this a couple times, you can start setting your clock or your calendar by that. You know that once you get through this, you get to breathe. The most painful part of the cycle is this one, the walking on eggshells. It could happen any time now. After a while, you're just like, let's just get it over with and get past it. And if that person's in the ER and I say, oh, you didn't do anything, what I've just done is put on a big sign saying, I don't really listen to anything you say, because if you told me the truth that you do something, I'd probably judge you for it. I believe you didn't do anything. And if you tell me the truth, then I might not like you anymore. So we want to recognize that. I mean, sometimes it's like, okay, I'm cooking dinner and I don't have time to pick up the Legos. If I burn the dinner, then she'll hit me instead of the kid who left the Legos on the floor when he steps on it. Sometimes it's a matter of timing, sometimes it's a matter of age. And so we want to recognize that and switch it to, there's nothing anyone could do to justify that response. No, you didn't do anything, but whatever you did. I mean, that's another thing that you do to kind of save your ego some, is to have some sense of control. You're in a place where you've got no control. If I can at least aim it, then I get a sense that I'm not totally helpless. So the psychological effect of trauma, be it a short one or a long chronic one, is if it keeps happening, your brain's like, well, why don't we just live here and make it a shorter trip to responding to a threat? Okay, your brain gets very primed to expecting threat, and thus it starts to respond to threat with a lower threshold. Okay, so anything could trigger it. You know, used to be that someone had to actually attack me. Now, if someone's just standing too close to me, I get that same threatened feeling, and I will respond however I respond to a threat, whether it's by fighting or running away or freezing up or submitting. And this is what used to be playing out in class. You know, kids were getting into fights all the time, or kids who run away or mentally run away. I mean, the difference between freeze and mental flight is freeze, you are really paying attention to the room. Mental flight, you're there, but you are not there. You're dissociated. Okay? Posture, the one who always needs to get the last word in, has to have a sense that people will respect them, because if they don't respect them, bad things will happen. And then we kind of like the kids that just want to help us carry everything and clean things and so on. And it's kind of nice to have a volunteer, you know, servant like that. But you do got to stop and think, what experience has this kid had of authority figures that they have this desperate need for me to actively like them? What do they think I might do if they don't have this clear evidence that I like them? And no matter what's going on of those, the world never makes sense. they never feel safe. They're always on edge. You know, if you think of anything that you're really scared of, you know, whether it's someone did you wrong or you've got a phobia of spiders. You know, let's all pretend we got a phobia of spiders, right? Okay, you've got to take a test now. There's a spider in a cage up here. How long are you going to concentrate on the test? Especially if you look closely at that cage and notice that the spider has gotten out of the cage. And you don't know where it is now. Now go take that test. You know, just constantly being under threat is really going to get in the way. So, I love pictures of brains that don't look like brains. You got here 2 brains, all right? This is one that got to grow up in a healthy environment, okay? You don't really think much about your breathing. You think occasionally when like a car is coming that you need to step faster. You spend more time focused on emotional relationships and emotional reactions and stuff like that. And you get to spend an awful lot of time up in your frontal lobe, cerebral cortex, thinking about future consequences of things and should I do that or not, and what was that person's intention really, and what are my plans for next week. If, however, every time you start to think about, you know, emotional things, you get dragged down to you're not safe, or you start going to algebra and now someone is targeting you and you feel like emotional harm is happening, you keep getting dragged down. You don't get to spend much time up there. Your brain kind of forgets how to get there very easily, you know? Getting to the fear center, that's a, well-worn path. But getting to the cognitive center, that's like a back stairway to the 3rd floor that your brain does not always remember how to get there, okay? So you've got the limbic system, the fear center, overdeveloped, and the frontal lobe is, I mean, a little bit underdeveloped, but mostly just offline a lot of the time. Memories, remember, the memories are really fragmented. So if you've got a kid who periodically throughout the day feels threatened, that means periodically throughout the day, their memory center turns into Swiss cheese. If you're teaching anything that needs kind of a linear continuity thing going, kind of like someone's hitting the mute button on you for a few seconds or a few minutes every so often throughout the class. No wonder they might be lost. Also, their sleep might be disrupted, either through nightmares or if they're still in an environment that is not conducive to sleep. Sleep is when you consolidate memories. Anyone still have grad school ahead of you? Come on, everybody. We all have grad schools ahead of us, right? Unless you're like over 50. I'm so proud of you that you learned how to say stop to the people who want you to get more degrees. But if you want to learn anything and not have to cram again before the test, after learning, get a good night's sleep that night. Stay up all night to study, you're totally shooting yourself in the foot because your brain will not remember that stuff. If every time you learn, you sleep that night, when you go back to do the full semester review, you don't have to relearn as much of it because it's there. So if you got a kid who's not getting much sleep, either because they're keeping themselves up on their phone all night or for other trauma-related reasons, they're not going to be remembering what you told them the day before as much. I had to go relearn all of that because I was in psych class. I did not go. Also, their sense of time is all mucked up because, I mean, down here, your heart does not care about time. When you're threatened, minutes, seconds, you might go into more thinking about hours when you're thinking more relationship, and extended future is really a function of the frontal lobe. So if you got kids where they just seem kind of lost and disoriented to time all the time, recognize that, yeah, that's what's going to be happening, okay? If you got a kid who's like, wait, we got gym today? And you're like, yeah, it's Tuesday. We have gym every Tuesday for the last, 3 months now. And they're like, huh, I never noticed that. It's sort of like saying, hey, is your birthday falling on a Monday or a Tuesday next year? And you'd be like, how do I know? Getting those things to line up is getting patterns like that to line up. It's a huge span of time. And then we turn around and tell them, okay, you've got something that's due in 2 weeks. And we're kind of surprised that they don't start it till the night before. How many of you really put as much effort into your retirement savings as you should by now? What's going on now is now, and the rest is just too big a span of time for them to necessarily think about. So what you want to do is make sure that they have easy access to reorienting, having schedules posted, having schedules that you go over and review periodically. So we want to have trauma-sensitive schools. We talked about trauma-sensitive schools, and schools are like, oh, not another thing we need to do. Trauma sensitivity is based on these things. First is recognizing that anyone could have trauma, not just the kids that you go, yeah, that one probably. Any of the kids, any of the adults. You get any people in a room recognizing that they may have trauma, they don't necessarily show it. Anyone old enough to remember when people only put on gloves to keep from giving germs to their patients? You know, I remember in my high school, they'd do blood drive without wearing gloves. Heck, they'd like snip the tube and then just open and close the clamp to fill an open test tube for testing it. I'm really old, aren't I? I should stop this. Anyway, then we went through a really ugly period when people discovered that there were like viruses to be afraid of, and they decided that they would only be afraid of some people though. So it was like, oh, you I don't need to wear gloves for, but you, I think I need to wear gloves for you. You know, if you look gay, if you look like a drug addict or a Haitian, for some reason Haitian was on the list, then I put on gloves. But someone else, no, I'm sure you're healthy and fine. It was a really ugly, ugly time. And then at some point, people finally realized, oh wait, you can't actually see a virus. Maybe we should just put gloves for everyone. And we're not stigmatizing people and we are safer. So it's the same sort of thing. If you would not say something a certain way because this person you know who has that traumatic experience in their past is in hearing, consider just not saying it that way anyway and having a more universal approach, which does not mean you can't say anything. It just means being compassionate and possibly giving people a heads up beforehand. We also want to recognize that when you see problem behavior, it's not necessarily just to annoy you. Sometimes it's because the kid is having a response to the environment that is based on trauma. So it's trying to shift the idea of like, what's wrong with this kid to what happened to this kid? That this is the kind of reaction they have in these situations. And we want the schools to promote healing and ideally not continue to re-traumatize the kid. As I said, schools, you have so much on your plate. It's like, oh, another thing we need to do. But the thing is, the elements of this, they are not like extra things to do for a small minority of needy people. One thing we've established is not a small minority, but they're useful for everyone. It's like no one in here appears to be in a wheelchair. Has anyone ever used a ramp when you're wheeling something? Turns out you do something to help people and it helps everybody. You know, the people who are all distressed about in younger grades trying to be less gender stereotype specific in case there's any trans kids in the classroom. I'm like, okay, that's good. I think it kind of rocks that all the cis kids don't get exposed to someone's stereotypical ideas about what genders are either. That they can grow up to be whatever kind of male or female or other they want to be. So it can be helpful to everybody, not just the target audience. So if we look at what are the elements of this, there ain't one of them up there that's terribly specific only to trauma. Positive relationships, self-regulation, being able to actually be aware of and have some element of control over your behavior, your emotions, and your attention span. Highlighting success for everybody, academic and non-academic. And I know it's really hard because you got so much of the academics to do. And adding in trying to remember something else to praise about kids. It's an added burden. But I want you to remember, raise your hand if you are a good singer. Who are the good singers? Fine, all the good singers. Okay, well, whatever. From now on, and for the next 15 years, basically forever, every day you are going to go and spend 6 to 8 hours a day in opera school, where you will be told every day in every way that what makes you a worthwhile human being worthy of taking up space on this planet is your ability to sing. How are you going to feel about that? You gotta recognize that's what an exclusively academic focus does to kids. You know, a lot of kids like, yeah, this is not something I'm very good at, and it's the only thing that matters. So we really want to help them recognize other things better. And yeah, physical and emotional health for everybody. Yeah. It was just, so, but first, not re-traumatizing them. Okay. We would like to try not to replicate the traumatic environment, which is just sensory overload sometimes. I mean, I had a lot of fun looking at the pictures. I mean, I've been in some kindergarten classrooms where it's like, I'm about to have a seizure. This room is so enthusiastically cheerful. In every single place, there's a different, it's like, okay, yeah, maybe it could be a little bit more chill, or giving them a place where they can be a little bit more chill, so that they know that there are safe places to go when they need it. So eliminating when it is loud or stressful. I think we can agree that this teacher is trying to be intimidating. But we might not notice that this dude up here, I mean, depending on what that girl's experience has been, she might not really be hearing a word he's saying right now. I don't know where we get the idea that you talk to kids like this, you know? I know everyone's needs are different, but do your best to get to a level and talk horizontally to everybody who is at a lower height than you for whatever reason. Oops, I did not mean to keep going. Okay. We also want to recognize things that are demeaning, belittling, ridiculous. Like, oh, we never do that. We always do that. We've got to remember that. We've got to notice that something that is very important to a kid that we as wise adults know is not important, we tend to tell the kid, oh, come on, that's not important, as opposed to recognizing that, no, for them, it's really important. You know, a kid's having a total meltdown. Why is it so loud in here? Oh, it's just Johnny. Oh, why are you guys late? Mary had a problem again. You know, that again. You so. Yeah. And if a kid's really upset about something that we are trying to reassure them by telling them it's no big deal. I mean, think for a moment, if you've got a small child who is in a panic that they can't leave for school because they don't know where their teddy bear is. You're like, it's just a bear, we'll find it when we get home. Take a moment to step back and imagine if you're trying to get to work and you suddenly realize you don't know where your toddler is. And if your husband said, oh, don't worry, I'm sure it's fine, we'll find them when we get home, you would not be okay with that answer. And we as adults know that there is an abundance of different, well, I hope you know that there are differences between toddlers and teddy bears. But from the kid's point of view, the most important thing in their world, they don't know where it is. And you're saying, hey, just go to school and learn things all day without being distracted. So we want to recognize when we tend to inadvertently or advertently belittle. So as kids are coming back to school, though I'm hoping I can get rid of the slides soon. Are people feeling like everyone's back yet? Oh, damn. Okay. We have the added things of people feeling like it's a threatening environment. You know, worry about contact precautions, worry about infection, or worrying about people's reactions to them. You know, if I forget to put on my mask, are people going to be like, oh my God? Or if I wear a mask, are people going to be like, what's wrong with you? Why aren't you taking out, you know? The polarization, not helpful on any number of levels. But think about if we live in a world that we have decided you've got the two teams to be on, and you can totally tell who's on which team based on just look at their face and whether you can see their face. If you live in a family that thinks masks are stupid and you go to a school where people think masks are important, that's an emotional stretch that can be very, very difficult to navigate. You know, if you want your friends to like you and you don't know which team they're on, that can be an issue. You know, you want the teacher to respect you, but you want your parent. It's very, very problematic. Okay. We also want to recognize that when the environment has changed, which I know you're getting back to more normal environments, but if you need to change the environment with barriers and stuff like that, people will be confused by anything that has changed. Confusion and slowing down to reorient is not trauma. And we need to stop assuming that every time people have to slow down and relearn something, that they are now damaged by this experience. And built into the return, I've been hearing a lot of stuff that is just intrinsically belittling to the kids, because everything I've heard, at least on the radio and stuff like that, is so much academic, academic, academic. We've lost so much ground academically, we need to get back. You know, and when it was during the lockdown, when everything's switching to Zoom, it's like, how are we going to be able to cram all this information into their brains? And the kids would go online. It's like, turn on your camera so that I know that you're here. You know, this is a kid who used to be able to come to school and have validating contact dozens of times before they even start the day. You know, as they're coming to school, everyone's like, hey, how you doing? How's your weekend? Hey, you know, if two people come in and they are upset, the teacher knows that they need to sort that out before they can get anyone to focus. And so how everybody's doing, the general emotional barometer, and the fact that I see you, I notice you. If you are not here, there will be a U-shaped absence that would matter to me. Got replaced by turn on your camera so that I know that you're there. Not so that I can connect with you, but just more of a sort of kidnappers pretty like video. And being told academics is all important, and then suddenly it wasn't important at all. And also apparently my absence didn't really matter either. And now we come back and everyone's like, academics, academics. And the kids are kind of lost in the shuffle. Like, did anybody miss me, or did you just miss my homework? So we want to make sure that we are focusing on that and recognizing that, you know, different people have different difficulties, and acknowledging where everyone's at. There's also a lot of internal belittling, you know, that whole, I don't have it as bad as everyone else and therefore I can't feel bad. You know, the 9-year-old who does feel bad about his party, but he knows grandma's scared of dying and therefore he doesn't want to complain about his party. He needs a place where he can complain about his party. So, to help heal, as we said, secure relationships. So we want to avoid surprises as much as possible. Tell people when things are going to be changing. Try not to have big sensory surprises because that's startling. And there are surprise parties for people. Okay. You want stable, reliable routines. That whole orienting people to time. If it's every morning we go through the calendar together, that's great. Then they know the first thing I do when I get to class is I'm going to be doing that. Very important to have bookends. Knowing how something starts and how something ends, it can be very mushy in the middle, and you'll still feel secure. That you know what's going to happen when you get there, and you're going to know when it's time to go. Remember how hard it was to log off of Zoom, and you had no idea whether it was over or not, and it's going to, you know, if you had like a, you say this, and then we all hit log out, we would feel so much more comfortable. And insecure relationships, we want them to be trusting us. Trustworthy does not mean likable. It means predictable. And I was a psych nurse on an adolescent unit. Likable was not an option. If I'm the same bitch every day when they come, they feel comfortable with that. They know what to expect, and they're fine with that. You know, they'd be like, Jolie's working. I hate when Julie's working. I'd be like, yeah, me too. Go to your room. It's room time. And then they'd all go to their rooms, because if they knew that they get a different answer every time they step out of their room, they're going to keep stepping out of their room. If they know they're going to get the same damn answer, then they've got that sense of security. They know where the boundaries are. We want to help them have increased success. Find something to praise. Make it specific. It doesn't have to be big. It has to be in detail. Okay, I taught clinicals for nurses. I know that did well in clinical is what you write about the one that you really remember, but you don't remember anything bad, so they should pass. You know, so rather than, hey, you had a really good day today, if you can say, hey, I just wanted to let you know, I noticed when everyone was leaving, you stopped and helped Heather clean up all the papers. That was so helpful. That was very nice of you. Thank you. That will land a lot more. This quote is from a podcast I have listed in links at the end about people noticing. And this was a woman who was in a horrible traumatic experience, family environment. The teacher had no clue. But the teacher told her that her capital M's were beautiful works of art. And that, she just held on to that. And it helped carry her. I mean, every day in her life when she writes a capital M, she remembers that she really existed to this teacher and she mattered. So, and yeah, we want help. Yeah. Who ends up eating at their desk? Yeah, we gotta try to not do that. Good luck with that. Especially because we want to model for the kids what healthy things it is. We want to, when you do something healthy, brag about it. We tend not to. You know, if you get a good night's sleep, tell everyone. You're not allowed to talk about your short nights of sleep unless you're talking about your long nights of sleep at least as often. And if you got way more short nights of sleep, have more long nights of sleep so you got more to talk about. And we want to recognize that balancing academics, balancing work and health is something that is a difficult thing to balance and therefore deserves work. You know, self-care is this thing that we kind of view as almost like selfish, like luxury, like self-care, that's getting pedicures and massages, right? No, self-care might be actually just drinking enough water throughout the day. Self-care might be stopping and taking a deep breath every so often. You know, or self-care might be deciding, yeah, I'm not going to do anything today. Self-care might be, I'm going to learn how to say no when that person asks me to put one more thing on my plate. That's a wonderful one to learn. We want to recognize that the staff are probably, you may have noticed, staff suffering more from COVID than the kids. I mean, not the disease, but the everything. Yeah. And we want to recognize that and be kind to each other. Also, when you've got a kid who's got a trauma reaction, want to recognize that the staff around them might also be having a vicarious or a secondary trauma reaction. It might be that what's going on for the kid reminds them of their own personal experience, or it might be that it reminds them of other kids. You know, this kid reminds me of that other kid that I was unable to help. And thus, I'm feeling all the pain of that the moment I see anything going on with this kid. So recognizing these things. Okay, we want to help kids feel like they have a sense of control. Okay, starting with the sense of control over themselves. Lots of kids, they think that it's amazing. Kids well into their teens or adulthood will live in a world where there's two emotions, good and bad. There's 2 degrees on and off. And everything's external. It's like the weather. You know, this happens, I'm going to feel bad, I'm going to get wet, there's nothing I can do about it. And so we want to help them recognize that emotions come in a wide variety of sizes, shapes, and colors. Start by just modeling for them naming emotions. Every time you see a kid do anything, if you can, say, oh, wow, it looks like you're really excited about it. Oh, it looks like you're really frustrated by it. Oh, it looks like you're really annoyed by it. The more vocabulary they have, the better. You know, my oldest daughter, she was always mad. School made her mad, homework made her mad, bus made her mad. And we're word people. Our house looks like it's built out of bookcases. And mostly just because it was frustrating hearing the same word. I'm like, you know, you keep saying mad. What do you mean when you say mad? Do you mean frustrated or do you mean enraged? And she's like, you're always trying to teach me new words. What makes me mad when you say that? So when you say you're mad at me now. Yeah, and then she'd slam the door and go away. But eventually she learned that frustrated feels different from irritated. And you do different things to deal with it. Like irritated and irritable are different. Irritated is you are bothering me. Irritable is everything is bothering me. And recognizing that there are these differences and you do different things to respond to them. Then we want to help teach them what are the things you can do to respond to them. First thing is you recognize that no off switch. Ain't nothing healthy out there that's an off switch. Whatever you're doing, you're trying to just take it down a few notches. You're not trying to eradicate it. If you're angry, yes, of course you're angry. Let's see if there's a way for you to be angry and manage it as opposed to angry and it manages you. So you start by looking at what their physiological response is and try to reverse that. So if you feel hot, you do something cold. We do this automatically. I feel hot and flushing on the verge of tears. I get a cold cloth. I wipe my face down. I feel less hot, less flushed, less on the verge of tears. You know, it's not a magic cloth that erases all grief, but it helps bring it down to where I can get a grip on it. And you want to help bring out the rational mind whenever possible, whenever they're starting to get very emotional about things. You want whatever consequences are happening to be rational and logical. You need to be able to draw a line of pearls of this is what you did and this is what happens as a result of it. You need to spell out all the details. Do not assume. Now you got a kid who has a total meltdown and now they're lining up to go to the field trip. And you're like, you cannot go to the field trip because he just had that meltdown. Their point of view, this is total non sequitur. You need to say, because for a good 20 minutes this morning, you could not follow anyone's verbal directions, no one feels that it would be very safe for you to be out at the zoo because if you don't follow verbal directions there, it would not be safe. So we need to see you be able to follow directions a little bit more consistently, and then you'll be able to go to the next one. You need to be able to spell it out. If you can't spell it out because you can't draw a line connecting them, you need some different consequences. So they aren't just power-based. We would like to give them control whenever possible, which, oddly enough, could include choosing the consequences. They will usually pick harsher ones than you would. It's kind of freaky that way. But the place I worked had 2 units, and we did things different from the rest of the hospital. Like the nurse was not in charge of the unit, but we had some staff that were from the rest of the hospital, and they'd automatically hit the panic button. We wanted them to stop doing that because we do things differently. But I was up on the second floor and someone hit the pen up on the first floor and I was bored. So I decided to come down to see what was going on. And I get there and there's like 20 staff from the rest of the hospital there. And the kid is sitting there quietly because he can do the nap. He's just waiting for them to leave and then he will resume throwing chairs or whatever. So I come over and I sit down next to him and a nurse supervisor of the building comes in. Where's the nurse? Because she thinks the nurse is in charge. Everyone looks at me because I was the only nurse there because the nurse for that unit, I think she was on eBay in her office. She was not a very good nurse. But anyway, they all look at me and the supervisor says, so what's the plan? So I look at the kid next to me and say, so what's the plan? She totally lost it. The supervisor just starts screaming, I don't want to know his plan. I want to know your plan. I said, well, if it's not his plan, it's not much of a plan. It's really just kind of a roadmap for how to piss us off some more. Whereas if he tosses out a plan, like I get to eat ice cream and stay up all night, he'd be like, yeah, try again. You know, we get to veto it, as does he. If we make a plan, he vetoes it by just violating it. So knowing that we both have veto power, let him dive into the process. Because then if he has agreed that this is what the plan is, then he's a lot more likely to follow it, and you can kind of nail him a lot more precisely when he doesn't. But you're the one who said that you should be doing this. So we also want to help them identify those triggers that we were talking about and learn to manage them. Figure out which are the unnecessary triggers that you can go ahead and avoid. You know, if I have a phobia of spiders, I need to learn to deal with that. I can't just run and scream whenever I see a spider because it turns out those suckers can get inside a car. And if I'm driving, I need to not run and scream if it surprises me. If on the other hand, I have a phobia of armadillos, I can let that one lie. I do not need to work on that one at all. So you figure out which ones you're going to go ahead and, at least for now, accept, and which ones you need to deal with because it's a necessary trigger. And how can we be supportive? How can we help you have less strong a reaction? You know, if you've got a kid who's going to totally start sobbing it whenever there's a fire alarm, we need to help them work through that and also try to not make fun of them if they're sobbing after a fire alarm and notice that the other kids are. It helps if we stop letting kids use trigger as a get out of responsibility free card. Oh, if I'm triggered, then I don't have to do that. It's on my plan that I'm triggered if people talk loud and therefore no one's allowed to talk loud around me. You know, my phobia of spiders, it lived for so long because I never encountered a spider. It was like magic. You scream loud enough at one of those, everyone will go out of their way to make sure you never encounter another spider. But that's not good for the kid. You need to be able to manage things yourself. And so, what is your life like with this limit? And if it's, I never encounter it, okay, what if we all stop rearranging the world for you? What will your life be like? What's it like now? What will it be like in the future? If it's that every time you feel anxious, you must leave and go to the nurse's office, what is going to happen if you are working at a job and you feel anxious? If you walk off of the job, you might not have a job anymore. So if you want to be able to be someone who has a job, it's not that you never get to leave when you're anxious, but you need to be able to decide whether I'm going to follow the rule or break the rule right now. Have it be your control, not your emotions controlling what you do. You know, if this was someone following you around, giving you these rules, you know, you are not allowed to use the bathroom and you cannot chew in public and you have to curl into a ball and cry whenever someone slams the door, you would not tolerate someone following you around, bossing you like that. So don't let your triggers follow you around and boss you like that. And then working past it is a process that takes time. And I've got a whole other presentation about that, but recognizing that it's really hard work. You break it in steps and then you do it. Behavior plans that we tend to have, we do them badly. For one thing, we call them behavior plans. And we tend to say, this kid has bad behavior. We need to make a plan for how to make them behave better. No, what we really want is to be able to say, hey, kid, we noticed that in these situations, things don't go very well, and you don't look like you're having a good time either. So what can we work out to help you plan how to have behavior that does not mess up your life so much? So the goal is for the kid to be able to choose what they're doing rather than having their reactions choose it. You know, they think that we're trying to choose what they're doing, and we want to say, no, we want you to be able to choose what you're doing. We want you to be able to say, if I do this, then this happens. If I do this, then that happens, and I get to choose rather than I'm just automatically going to do that. Ideally, the kid is involved in the process. You know, completely involved, like doing it themselves. We can put out some things there, and then when they say none of that works, say, okay, well then you fill your coping box yourself. Of course, I don't know what goes in there. You know, it's like a teenager who's like, I'm hungry, there's nothing in the fridge. Then go shopping because you didn't like any of the stuff I bought, so find things yourself. It'd be really great if it's universal, not just kids that need it, because everyone needs it. So anyone who's upset, you could say, hey, you need to go look at your list and see what you could do to help feel better now. And then once you've got the plan, who needs to know about it, and how are you the one who talks about it, rather than, okay, now we will go and take care of telling everyone all this. DMH has a nice colorful one. This is one that's more for older kids, but basically lets a kid line up. These are the precursors. If I'm hungry, if I'm tired, if I'm cold, what are the things that trigger and set me off? What makes it worse? This is really individual. One kid is like, leave me alone, I want space. Another kid, you're abandoning me. One kid, I'm here to support you. Oh, now I feel humiliated, never staring at me. So you need to find out what actually makes it better or worse for each kid. And we want to know, how do we know when you're upset? This is a great time to talk to the kids about the fact that we are not psychic, that we do not know. Oh, well, when you get really quiet, that's because you're sad. I did not know that. Now I know. Some people are quiet when they're thinking, but you're quiet when you're sad, so now I know to watch for that. Then draw their attention to what happens if you let this spin out of control that you kind of don't like. You know, do you end up breaking things and then you're getting punished? Do you end up, you know, getting detention? Do you end up saying things to your friends that make your friends not want to talk to you anymore? What are the things that don't go that well for you that you'd like to learn how to not do? Is it that you start using a substance or start self-injuring, anything like that? And then the coping skills list. That's where you get as many of them as you can. You can never have too many. And the people who say, I tried all of them, none of them work. A coping strategy is literally any human action whatsoever. So you really cannot have tried all of them. Okay, you know, walking to the top of a mountain and looking down, I don't think you tried that well, you know. You start by focusing on sensory things and physical responses, but then you also just, hey, just try doing this. Does it make you feel a little better? Okay. Don't try them when you're already upset. Try them when you're relatively okay. When you're already upset, of course it's not going to work. I also recommend having them write them on cards, because then it's easy to add and take out and sort them and quantify them. This final poster, I like it because it kind of doesn't make sense. They take all these aspects of resiliency. Resiliency is coming back from a threatening or a traumatic experience relatively intact. And they divide it under individual, family, and community. But then they divide it really weird. I mean, school is over here in community. I know you can't read it, but basically it says school should be good. Okay, so got that? School should be good. But over here in an individual, okay, they've got relationships. Not quite sure how relationship is a one-person thing, just kind of by definition. I mean, that's right up there with conflict resolution. It's also not a terribly individual thing. These are things that are happening between people in school. So all of these are things that we are addressing. All of them. I mean, temperament, you might say, well, temperament, that's just the way the kid's born. But yes, how they interact with their temperament, they learn from the people around them. If you've got a kid who is intrinsically shy, and they come to a school where the teacher keeps everyone quiet through targeted use of public humiliation, they will probably be very, 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 very shy and pathologically so. If the same shy kid comes into an environment where there's support and they're allowed to not necessarily have to, you know, get up and sing solos in front of the whole class, they will still be shy when they grow up, but they'll be shy with an ability to cope with it. Let's see, history and mastery and expression, being able to know that you're doing, that you can do things. Understanding your experiences and being able to express them, whether that's through, you know, art or words, having words for all your emotions and so on. And then culture, again, I'm not quite sure how culture is a one-person thing. Culture is by definition a community thing. And it's one that we really need to not forget. My kids went to a two-way bilingual school in Somerville. And my son was in the pilot year, and by the time he's like in second grade, the teacher said, you know, we've got this curriculum for bullying, anti-bullying, you know, not teaching them how to, but how to not. And we don't know when we're going to get to use it because there's no bullying. I'm like, you need to look harder. There's always more. They're like, no, we've looked harder. What is it? It's a two-way bilingual school. Half the kids speak Spanish, half the kids speak English, half the day is taught in each. No one gets to be top dog all day. Everyone gets to have a day when they need help, and everyone has a part of the day when they can offer help. And it just did wonders. As opposed to kids in transitional bilingual programs that were being told, how soon can you stop being that and be this like you're supposed to? You know, whereas, you know, our kids would do better on the English, the Spanish-speaking Unidos kids did better on English tests than the English-speaking English kids in the city. Because it turns out if you're not constantly being told to stop being who you are, and not being told to kind of make fun of your parents because they have access, you grow up a little bit more intact and less likely to ignore any advice from your elders once you're about 12. So this is what, plus we had just the best parties, PTA parties, right? So really recognizing the importance of fostering culture and supporting culture, because that's something that I know differs town to town, but generally in America, we are proud of this. We're very much, one of my best friends is Chinese, and when her son went to kindergarten and they go to the first meeting, the teacher's like, oh, you and your husband can speak English. And he's like, oh, I mean, we well enough, we get by. The kindergarten teacher, oh, well, you should speak English at home all the time so that Luke will learn English faster. It's like, but we don't want him to forget his Chinese. Why? You're here now. You know, my oldest daughter, she had the Spanish beaten out of her by the school system, that she was not allowed to speak any Spanish, and then she couldn't get into college because she didn't have a foreign language. It's like, oh, because, you know, all through high school when you're a foster kid, it's hard to get all the credits you need. So anyway, so there's all kinds of useful links. I discovered a lot of the useful links were coming from this one list, and so I'll just send you that whole list. I might have already sent it to some people. And then if you prefer to just watch videos, because reading stuff hurts after a while, there's various good TED Talks. There's stuff about the Purple Book. You know, people heard of the Purple Book? You can download the whole thing. It's a excellent curriculum about trauma-sensitive schools. This is the podcast about that teacher. And this is a really cool short movie. I really recommend this. It's about a girl going into foster care. And once she, in it, all the adults, okay, not all the adults are kind of tough, but all the other adults are doing the best they can to be supportive once she's out of the bad environment. And she still has issues. Go figure. You know, she's still reacting. She's still having problems. And we got to recognize, because working in psych, I'd have so many staff who are like, oh, why are we even bothering? Because the kid's still doing, you know, this is, you know, whatever we're doing, they're still broken, basically. I'd say, okay, you guys, we're not building buildings. You don't get to stand back and admire what you have built. You're planting seeds, and you don't know which ones will grow. You don't get to know. Maybe they'll come back and talk to you later. Probably not. So you go ahead and you plant them all. And some of them, yeah, they aren't going to grow, but the other ones will. You don't know. You don't know if you might be, you know, the person who every time this kid writes a capital M, they remember you because you made them feel like a human being. So I know it's really hard to just keep planting seeds and never get to know whether it's a total waste of time or not. You just got to trust that it's not. So that's the trauma presentation. And I decided 210 is how long it goes because that's how long I talked.